Ohio voters are seeing two ballot issues this election. We covered issue 1, requiring courts to consider public safety as one of the factors in setting bail last week. This week, issue 2. The argument against issue 2 says this, quote, unnecessary constitutional amendment is cloaked in fear and false patriotism. It argues issue 2 endangers the freedom of every citizen to vote. It threatens the long-standing right of 17-year-olds who will turn 18 by the general election to vote in primaries. It locks in a 30-day voter registration period, saying, quote, it's the harshest blackout period in the country and that it hits young voters hardest. And it claims that issue 2 is a copycat attack on Ohio by wealthy, secret money special interests from out of state. Among those opposed to issue 2 is Steven Steinglass, Dean Emeritus of the Cleveland Marshall College of Law and an expert on the Ohio Constitution.
It's misleading because if one goes into the ballot booth or one gets one's absentee ballot and looks at the ballot, one thinks this is primarily about non-citizens voting in local elections. But it's actually much more complicated than that. And the ballot board pretty much failed by a 3-2 vote, I might add, to provide citizens of Ohio with accurate information about what they were voting on. One really has to go to the language of the proposed amendment to appreciate what I'm saying.
Well, let's start with the concern about the right to vote for some 17-year-olds. You write that the amendment would replace the word every and substitute only a, which you say changes the grant of the right to vote to a restriction of the right. Well, when I asked Secretary of State Frank LaRose about this, he said he thinks that could be the subject of future litigation, but he doesn't think that's going to happen necessarily. Representative Bill Sight said he thinks that issue is a red herring and, quote, part of the organized effort by the left progressives to obfuscate the issue. Is there a real concern here that 17-year-olds who've been allowed to vote in this way won't be able to anymore?
No, I think they were just sort of the innocent victims of sloppy drafting. I mean, I can't say whether LaRose or Seitz or any of these folks got together and said, let's go after 17-year-olds. I just have no evidence to believe that. I think they wanted to put on the ballot a solution in search of a problem. I don't think we have a problem with non-citizens voting. Non-citizens have not been able to vote in Ohio since the early 19th century. In fact, in 1817, the Ohio Supreme Court held that the ballot was restricted to citizens. It upheld an 1809 law to that effect. I know there's sort of an argument that, well, that just applies to state elections, but cities might suddenly decide they want to turn the ballot over to non-citizens. And apparently there's been some movement in that direction in some places. If that was the real concern, all they had to do was amend the home rule provision of the Ohio Constitution and say cities shall not extend the vote in any election to non-citizens. That would have been a simple, clean, understandable way to do it. What they did instead is, as you suggested in your question, is they amended language that's been there since 1851. 1851 Constitution provides that every citizen of the United States of the age of 18 who has been registered to vote, blah, 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 is entitled to vote. So we'll just deal with the 18-year-olds for a moment. What they've done is they've taken this grant of the right to vote and made it a restriction by taking out the word every and putting in the phrase only a. So it would read only a citizen who is 18 may vote. That's a big deal. Only a couple of words, but it's a big deal because constitutions are sensitive documents. Words matter. Now, LaRose says there might be litigation, la-di-da, and there might be litigation. I don't think that answers anything. Seitz says that this is part of a left-wing, what is it? Conspiracy to
obfuscate the issue.
I didn't know that I was part of a conspiracy. I guess I'm a conspirator on this. No, I mean, it's just simply the facts. I mean, it's the facts and the law. and the ability to read and the ability to take care. So, I personally think that they kind of screwed up. And now, being given human nature, if you screw up, you have two ways to go. You can admit it, heavens to Betsy, or you can obfuscate. So I think this is obfuscation in return, gaslighting we call it. So I think it will have an immediate effect on 17-year-olds who had been voting in primaries. There may well be litigation, but you don't have to be a rocket science to predict litigation. As far as registration of voters, there's currently a 30-day registration requirement in the Constitution. But again, it's a grant. If the legislature wanted to make registration 45 days, they couldn't, but they could make it 15 days if they chose to do so. Under the new language, I don't think they can. So I think this proposal has those effects, and they don't tell us. That's what I really find most problematic. The people are the ones who play an important role in our Constitution, and they vote, but they only vote based on the information that they receive, and the information they received is incomplete.
I want to ask you about the potential consequence that you just suggested there. There's a potential consequence that you suggest may go against what some Republicans have proposed, shortening the time period for voter registration. You say the amendment would not allow that. They would not have the ability to shorten the early voting period.
That's how I read it. I mean, that's how I read only that prefatory language. So I mean, if they're talking about it, they haven't been coordinating with their brethren across the hall, because it seems to me this amendment would be inconsistent with that. I mean, I think shortening the period would be a good thing, given the technology and given the fact that 30 days, there's no magic in 30. But I think there'd be real tension there if they tried to shorten it after this passes in, on the assumption that it will pass.
Do you think the amendment violates home rule?
Well, it violates the spirit of home rule, but it doesn't violate home rule in a legal sense, because the proposed amendment also amends the home rule provision of the Ohio Constitution. So they've covered that issue. So there is no home rule violation. One last thing. Why did this come up? That's rhetorical. I'm not really asking you a question. I know you asked the questions. Perhaps it's something to do with politics. Shocking. Perhaps they thought putting on the ballot a proposal that had a bit of an anti-immigrant tone to it might help the cause. I don't know. Again, I wasn't in the room, so I don't know what people were thinking.
You'd said earlier that this is a solution in search of a problem, and no Ohio cities are doing this. There were references to how Yellow Springs had talked about doing this, but that was shut down by the Secretary of State. But Representative Seitz had said the Democratic candidate for Cuyahoga County Executive, who he calls one of the most powerful positions in the state, said he is open to non-citizen voting. So is this a solution in search of a problem, or is this something that you think could be potentially coming down the road?
Well, I'm not aware of what the county executive said, but if they're thinking about it and people want to cut that off, then this, in broad terms, is a rational response to say, no, you can't do that. So maybe they have a problem there, but I don't think the main motivation was trying to solve that down the road problem, because there will be litigation, and I suspect if a county tried to extend the franchise to non-citizens, Secretary LaRose would be involved in the litigation that he described, trying to stop that from happening, as apparently did happen with Yellow Springs.
But the timing of this is important potentially in that there are no cities who are doing this, which are doing this, but yet this is before voters in this particular election.
Isn't that curious? So I don't know what to draw from that other than there's some political motivation going on.